Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Today, we are joined by Sheila Louise Hammer, who's going to talk to us about self-care. Sheila, how are you doing today?
Hi there, Mike. I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well myself. Thanks so much for
Good.
asking. So why don't
Sure.
you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Sheila Hammer. I am a licensed clinical social worker. So, I have my master's in social work from USC, University of Southern California. And I'm licensed in both the state of Arizona and California. And so, who I am, I'm a wife and mom of three little ones, ages 6, 4, and 2. So, life is very busy. But in the professional realm, I'm a clinical social worker, and my background is working in oncology. I've worked in a large cancer hospital and then transitioned to more community-based organization, did some partnering with your organization, and now I've taken a step into kind of a different area, and I teach students who are working on either their Bachelor of Social Work or their Master of Social Work. And so I teach field education, and so I oversee students in their internships. And so the topic today is something that is near and dear to me and something my students hear me talk about a lot and all the time. So I'm really excited to be here, and just thank you so much for the opportunity.
Excellent. Well, yes, as you said, the topic is self-care. That's what we're going to talk about for the most part. But you have so much experience in different things, and especially having worked with cancer patients before, you've got a really unique perspective to offer. So thank you so much for bringing that to us today. So what exactly is self-care anyway?
Yeah, so self-care is just what it sounds like. It's taking care of yourself. There's this concept of self-care versus self-comfort. And so self-care is something that's really going to be taking care of you, that's kind of feeding your soul, is how I think of it. What are you going to do where when you finish, you feel fed? Emotionally, physically, spiritually. So it's not necessarily sitting in front of the TV eating bonbons all day. That's more in the self-comfort realm, but self-care is something that really is going to take care of you individually, and it looks different for every single person. And there's different phases of life that happen where it might be easier to do some self-care or harder to do that. And so self-care is just that general concept of how do you take care of you in a way that's meaningful for you individually.
Okay, it's interesting. Yes, self-care versus self-comfort. What is the difference between those two things?
Right. So self-care could be, it could be so many different things. And so what I do want to say is I don't want anybody listening to this or watching this to hang on to one thing that I say and say, oh, I'm not doing self-care because I'm not doing X, Y, and Z. That's not it, because it's so individualized. But self-care is something that is healthy. It's good for you. So it could be going out with friends right now. That's a bit challenging. It could be taking a nap. Maybe you just need some nap or some quiet time. It could be doing a meditation, going on a walk, walking your dog, or just having carved out time. For me, having carved out time to play with my kids, something that I know is meaningful for them and that then feeds me. It is not going to be necessarily, like I said, I gave the kind of silly example of sitting in front of the TV eating bonbons all day. Maybe you need a day to just veg, but I would say that's more self-comfort, because by the end of that day, you might be feeling really sluggish, right? It's not exactly a healthy thing to sit in front of the TV and just eat junk food all day. It's not necessarily, I'm trying to think of more self-comfort things, just eating junk food, not eating healthy. Some of that's okay, sure, but it's not, it's more about like the pattern. What pattern are you creating for yourself? Is it something that's really going to take care of you? Or is it something that is really going to kind of make you further struggle, whether that be emotionally, physically, relationally? So self-comfort, it may not be having 3 glasses of wine every night. It's kind of, how do you feel by the time you're done with it, and the next day maybe even. And so I think that's one way to think about it, is how do I feel when I'm done with this activity, and the next day and the day after? Do I feel good about it? Do I not? So again, I don't want anybody to hang on to any one thing as like a judgment, because I think that's one issue with self-care is the judgment that goes into it, of feeling judgment, maybe what others might think about that. But what I think more of is that internal self-judgment. You know, if maybe you're having a hard time getting your full 6 to 8 hours of sleep a night, okay, you know, so that's okay. So what can you do to still take care of you? Maybe you're not eating a salad every single day like you said you were going to do starting January 1st. Well, that's okay. It's not about perfection. You know, it's not about carving out an hour every single day at a specific time, saying I'm going to do an hour of meditation at noon during my lunch hour every single day. And then when you don't, tearing yourself up. It doesn't have to be that. And that's not really realistic, especially in the times that we're living in, and everything that, especially on patients' plates and caregivers' plates, all the appointments, and just the need to be flexible in the schedule. So it looks different for everybody. It could just be, how am I going to be present today on my drive to my appointment? How am I going to take care of me? Maybe it's blasting the music. Maybe it's just having the music off for that car drive and just being present, you know, recognizing the smells and the sights around you. So it really does look different for everybody. And I think one of the biggest pitfalls with self-care, and I hear this from my students too, is really feeling like I'm not doing enough, you know, or I'm not doing it right. So that's a judgment. And I think a lot of times it comes internally of I'm not doing it right, or I'm not doing enough. And that is going to tear you apart, which is the opposite of what we're looking for. And so even if it's just taking 15 seconds when you arrive to an appointment, sitting in your car, when you arrive home, anytime you get in the car, before you turn the engine on, having a practice of saying, I'm just going to sit here for 15 seconds. 15 seconds is not going to make or break any appointment, just about. I can almost guarantee it. But it really can make a difference in terms of how you feel in that moment and moving forward, because you're taking time to slow down and just be present in the moment.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of really good information. I think so much of what you see, so often associated with self-care is like that classic picture of someone doing yoga on the beach. And
Right.
obviously, like, we can't all do that all the time, but having the
Right.
experience be personalized, ultimately being kind to yourself and realizing that it doesn't have to be perfect, and being
Right.
able to really look at what that best strategy is for you is important. And understanding the difference between the short-term comfort of an activity versus the long-term care that can come out
Right.
of really practicing those things that are going to keep giving you good results over and
Mhm.
over again, and not actually potentially making things worse for just a short-term release or
Yeah.
comfort in that sense. Am I getting that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, that's definitely, a lot to unpack too, beyond that just yoga on the beach kind of idea. So, especially in your work directly in oncology and with cancer patients, what are some examples of appropriate self-care activities that are most manageable, most doable, and most successful for
Mhm.
those patients in those situations? So those in the chemo chair, those in treatment, those who are now, supporting themselves as survivors. Can you
Mhm.
help us just get some context for that community?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sometimes patients just have oh my gosh, so many appointments. It could be chemo every day or radiation every day, or a mixture of, the two. So there's so many different things on their plate, scheduling wise already. But then you think about the impact of what they're going through, not just the physical impact, but the emotional impact. And it's pretty intense to think about that. And it can make your schedule feel very tight and constricted. And so I think for people who are in treatment, one of the really great things you can do is to really carve out some time. And again, 5 minutes, just jot down some ideas as you're even listening or watching this. Again, don't try to overthink it or make it too difficult, because there's enough going on in your lives. And so if you just think about some ideas of things that you enjoy, or maybe things that you miss, um, things that you want to be involved in more. So maybe it is connecting with an old friend, or something that is becoming more and more popular, I feel like, is adult coloring books. It's just kind of like having some quiet time, having something to take your mind off things, doing Sudoku puzzles. Figure out what it is that you enjoy. Make a list and then think, what is one thing that I practically can incorporate this week? Don't try to cover every single thing. If you can, awesome. But most people don't have the capacity and the bandwidth to do that. And so, it's not making this list and then saying, okay, Monday I'm going to call a friend. Tuesday I'm going to do a 5,000 piece puzzle. Wednesday I'm going to go do meditation on the beach and do yoga for 2 hours. It doesn't have to be that. It could be, okay, this week I'm going to try really hard on this day because I know that this is kind of how my appointments fall. And so I know that, maybe Tuesday I have chemo, Wednesday I'm not feeling so hot, Thursday, Friday, I'm kind of coming out of it. Okay, maybe Saturday or Sunday over the weekend, I can practically try and make a phone call to a friend and connect, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Maybe it's 10 minutes. And if you think, I kind of borrow this term from a friend. I call myself a functional introvert. And so I love connecting with people on that deeper level, but I also know afterwards, a lot of times I might need some downtime, even though it energizes me, but also I know just how I function as an introvert. I need some quiet time also. And so maybe it's just saying to that person, texting them to schedule an appointment and say, I'd really like to chat with you. Could we chat for just 15 minutes on Saturday? So that way you kind of have it built into your mind that there's already some framework to work within and boundaries. So you're not feeling exhausted at the thought of the phone call. Maybe you're an extrovert and you say, can we have 2 hours to go out and have a socially distanced coffee or something? Somebody listening to this 10 years down the road is going to say, socially distanced coffee. We're living in a pandemic. So hopefully soon we won't have to have socially distanced coffees and lunches and all of that. But you get what I'm saying? Like, how do I schedule just one thing and make it something that the thought of it is not going to exhaust me? Maybe it's scheduling a nap. I'm not going through cancer treatment or anything like that, but I've seen my sister, one of my younger sisters, go through it. And I know sometimes she just needed some extra sleep. And it took the family recognizing like she just needs some time to be alone, to have some quiet time, have the lights off and music going for her to just feel like she's getting some of her energy back. And so being okay, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to cancer patients who had all of this on their plate, going through treatment or trying to recover from treatment, but then also trying to do everything else that they're used to doing. Not letting any of the balls drop, if you will, and trying to explain that to family and setting those boundaries was extremely hard for them. It's just not fair to you to expect yourself to constantly have the balls going in the air and not drop any. And it's not about dropping them. It's about how do I, maybe if you have to think about it, put self-care as one of those balls, start juggling that too and incorporate that into things, but being okay with setting time aside for yourself and knowing that it's really for your benefit to take care of yourself. It's for the benefit of your loved ones to take care of yourself. So maybe it's saying, okay, I'll schedule a 15-minute call when I'm in the chemo chair for the very beginning when I'm still feeling okay, or bringing a puzzle or having a friend come right now that's really challenging. A lot of places you can't bring somebody with you, but maybe it's scheduling a Zoom call for those extroverts who, I've heard from some patients and people who work in oncology, just the struggle right now that there, you think about chemo nurses and the nurses who are tending to you on your regular schedule. And right now that's not happening nearly as much as it used to, just because of they have a lot more on their plate, I think, from job expectations and having to sanitize things a lot more. But then also the socially distanced component, I know that the sense of loneliness seems to be growing, whereas some people, that was one of the very few times that they'd actually feel connected to somebody was when they were in their chemo chair to talk with other patients, talk with the nurses and the hospital staff. And so maybe it's scheduling a Zoom call with a loved one if you're feeling that, if you're that extrovert who really liked those connections and you're feeling that sense of isolation. during a time when maybe you used to feel connected, finding a way to incorporate those things, the self-care, what's meaningful for you. Like I said earlier, it could just be sitting in your car for 30 seconds before you open the door and go out and start your various, whole schedule of appointments. There's so many different ways to add self-care in, without it becoming a burden, without it needing to be a burden. And if you catch yourself feeling burdened by the need to do self-care, kind of rewind a bit, take a step back and say, okay, how do I do this in a way that's manageable for me and that makes sense for me? I don't know if that answered I hope that answered your question.
Oh, it answered my question and more. So it's always good. Yeah. Cause I think that ultimately, and what you ended on there kind of goes back even in some ways to what you had said earlier about judgment and how that plays in, of this maybe feeling burdened by this self-care is also part of the judgment around self-care and feeling
Right.
the need to do it, or, what that needs to be for your partner or your family members who are supporting you, or your caregivers who are supporting you in this journey. So when really looking at the stigma of health, of self-care in the sense of, feeling like even people in our culture, in our society in America, we're all expected to be workaholics, and
Right.
sometimes helping yourself is seen as just purely selfish, and you should be
Mhm.
giving yourself to everyone else, even if you're in a situation where you have cancer and you're in treatment. So when looking at that different real mindset of how that plays into it, how can we combat that stigma? How can we really look at self-care as something that is worth it and that we're worth it for self-care?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It is an ongoing battle. I Oh, it's so hard. It really is hard. I cannot tell you the number of people I've spoken to, especially when I was in the medical setting and offering counseling, who were going through just these really tough treatments. And they just felt so selfish sometimes, even just going to their treatments, having to take time off to go to their treatments, whether it be feeling like disappointing family because you're not able to, you don't have the energy level you used to have, you don't have the physical level that you had before all of this came into your life unexpectedly. But then also feeling like they were letting their employers down. I remember walking into patients' rooms and they're in their bed or in their chemo chair doing work, and I'm like, oh my gosh, stop. Like, it's okay to stop. So I think one way to combat it is really thinking about it yourself, but then also talking with your loved ones about it. People who care about you, friends, partner, children, and saying, this is what I'm going through, and sharing as much as you're comfortable with, given whoever it is you're talking to, and having those boundaries is okay. But saying, I'm going through this, I can't do everything I used to do. Dear partner, you're going to have to cook on Wednesdays and Thursdays because I just can't do it. Or talking with your boss or supervisor, and if you're not getting support from them, maybe there's a what is it called, EAP, employee assistance program, where you can talk with somebody or someone in HR to get support. But knowing for yourself, I think, really is where it has to start, of saying it is okay and it is good, not just okay, but it is good for me to take care of myself. So you think about, I love the analogy of when you go on a plane, which not a lot of people are doing right now, but when you go on a plane, the flight attendant, there's that whole spiel that they go through. And what do they say? If you ever need the oxygen masks and they fall out of the little, fake airplane ceiling, you got to put it on yourself first, because if you're not putting it on yourself first, you are not going to be able to help the person next to you or the person in front of you or behind you. Think of that. And I think that I go back to that metaphor all the time, because if we're not putting the mask on ourselves first, we're doing the opposite, right? We're either doing it or we're not. There's not a lot of gray area. Are you taking care of yourself or are you not? And so think of it that way, in terms of the judgment, like, oh, I'm not doing enough. Are you doing some? Okay, so there's some there. That's really good, because a lot of people don't have any self-care that they're participating in. And just the thought of that is really tough. I just came out of a season of having, I have a 6, 4, and 2-year-old. I feel like for 5 years, I really didn't have a ton of self-care or ability to do self-care because I had little ones. But now I do, and it's like, wow, this is amazing. So my self-care looks very different now than it did when I had little kiddos. The self-care used to be being in the moment and being okay with taking 30 minutes at the end of the day to rock the baby to bed, to go to sleep. Now it looks very different. And so I think recognizing that we have to take care of ourselves to take care of our loved ones. If we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to run into the ground. We really are. It's not just about, I think that the one thing with the metaphor is there can be this trap of thinking, oh, okay, so I have to do self-care so that way I can continue to take care of other people and I can do more and I can keep doing the things that I'm used to doing. Don't fall into that trap either, because we just need self-care to take care of us. The other things are extras. And I don't say that in a selfish way, but the reality is we have to take care of ourselves. If you don't have anybody else relying on you, awesome. Still take care of yourself, still do things that you need to do to keep going, because it really does make an impact on our emotional health, on our physical health, how well you're going to do through your treatments. If you're a caregiver for somebody, how how irritable are you going to be with them if something doesn't go the right way? Are you going to have the loving kindness and patience? Well, if you're not being able to fit in any self-care and you're just running from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, it's going to be really hard to continue to respond in love and kindness to others. And so I think that that's just one way to kind of think about it, is what does it mean for me? Recognizing and accepting, or trying to accept, that self-care is good, and then having those conversations with your loved ones about certain expectations that they can or cannot have for you in that moment. It's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. And I think you've convinced me to reevaluate some of my own self-care and see what I can do to improve, certainly there. And but one thing that I have a problem with sometimes, I'm sure many other people listening or watching will as well, is I can come up with a plan. I can overanalyze it and think about it a million ways and find the perfect thing that I can do for self-care. But then I have to stick with it. And that's when it gets a little harder in keeping that pattern going. So what are some ways people can plan to be successful in self-care? And I think what ultimately is really important about that planning process too, and where I often have the issue, is that I don't do a good enough job of anticipating where things are going to challenge or threaten that routine that I've created. So what can we do to both plan well and not overwhelm ourselves with too many options, but then also anticipate some challenges that might come down the road and sticking with it?
Yeah. So, and gosh, you could go down a rabbit hole Googling, how to have successful New Year's resolutions, because it really ties into that. And we're at the end of the year somehow already. And so we're at the end of the year where people are starting to think about New Year's resolutions. And, I have a friend who is an avid member of his gym. And he always gripes a little bit at the beginning of the year. He's like, oh, it's so full, but that's okay. I know once February hits, it'll be empty again. So that ties in with what you're asking, I think, perfectly. So one thing is, we think about SMART goals, and I'm going to miss some of it, but having something that is specific. So having those details of specific, what is my self-care going to be? Having something that's measurable. So putting it on a calendar and saying 15 minutes. So that phone call with a friend on the weekend, 15 minutes, just 15 minutes to hear someone else's voice, hear somebody who cares about you, having it be attainable. So don't, if you're already feeling like you're struggling getting self-care in to your schedule, maybe because you just have so much on your plate, or you're just exhausted from treatments, or you're working and taking care of a loved one and you just don't have a lot of emotional energy or capacity, have it be attainable, right? And then and measurable, and all of those things. And you can look up SMART goals, and there's so much great information out there now. So many more businesses are using them, and like performance evaluations. So thinking in that lens, I think, really helps. So not overscheduling yourself, not overcommitting, not going from 0 to 60, from the course of like December 31st to January 1st, I'm going to do it all. Start small, just start small. Go back to that list that I mentioned that, hopefully you're kind of jotting down ideas as people are listening to this. and think, what is one thing that I can incorporate this week? What is one thing that I can incorporate in 2 weeks? And then start to add variety. But what I would caution people against is to not try and do it all at once. And maybe don't even try and put it all in the calendar all at once for like an entire year. Because I think what tends to happen is when something doesn't go according to plan and something comes up and you just can't get to it, it's easy to fall in the trap of disappointment, and I didn't get to it, and I'm still not doing a good job, and kind of beating ourselves up over it. No, don't do that. It's okay. We pick ourselves up and we try again. You didn't get your hike in, or your walk in, or you're sitting on the porch in. Okay, we'll try again next week and put it back on the calendar. So having some wiggle room in terms of how you're looking at it, how you're scheduling things is okay, knowing that it's not going to be perfect. And there's going to be, like I said, there's seasons, right? There's seasons of life. When I was having babies, it felt like constantly for 5 years. That looked very different from how self-care looks for me now. And so just know that self-care is going to look different at different times in your life. And so maybe you have a new treatment that comes up. Okay, so it might be time to go back to the drawing board once you know how that treatment is going, not just scheduling wise, but how is it going to impact you physically? And then maybe even scheduling in time, once a month, I'm going to just evaluate myself. How am I doing on self-care? What is one thing that I can do to improve on? One thing that maybe I want to add into the mix now, I've been doing my puzzles for a month, even if that means once a week I'm sitting down for 10 minutes, kind of fidgeting with some pieces. Okay, next month I want to add in a bi-monthly, so every other week phone call with a loved one for 10 minutes or an hour. So I think adding variety is good, but kind of incorporating it slowly into the schedule and the routine and try. So some people are very strict in terms of their scheduling and their calendar. I would say try to not see it as necessarily a routine in the beginning, because I think that also can kind of set us up for failure of, I'm going to do self-care Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I didn't do it on Tuesday and Thursday. And so I'm done. It's not working. I'm not going to do it. Just schedule things in slowly. And then hopefully with time, when you reflect back, you'll start recognizing your own routine kind of naturally happening. You don't want to overthink it. Don't overthink the self-care piece. Think about it for sure, but try not to add that extra burden on your plate. I have students who I tell them at the very beginning of their time with me, I say, you are going to hear me talk to you about self-care until I'm blue in the face, right? I'm helping to train social workers who are going to go out in the field and they're going to work with people who need support. And if they're not putting the mask on themselves, they're going to run out of oxygen really fast. And it's really fun to see I get them usually for the course of an academic year. It's really fun to see them kind of learn and stretch and grow into self-care and what it can look like. And in the beginning, I hear from so many students, I'm not doing any self-care. It's like, okay, maybe you are, maybe you're not. And so let's talk about that. But how can we fit it in, and how are you thinking about self-care? And so often it's this, I'm not doing the yoga and meditation for 2 hours on the beach, right? There's this kind of very stereotypical idea of self-care. And it doesn't have to be like that. So don't overthink it, and don't beat yourself up over it when it doesn't happen. Maybe you just have a really rough week. Go, get back on the horse and try again for the next week. Put it on the calendar and really have the emotional capacity saying, I'm going to really put effort in trying to make this happen. But recognize also, especially for those of you who are in treatment, that sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes your body just needs rest and your mind just needs rest. And that in and of itself can be the self-care. So it's tough. It really is hard. Try not to make it too routine in the beginning, and kind of find where your natural routine lies, if that makes sense.
I see where those two things fit together. I see where the puzzle pieces are. So let's talk resources then to help support this. And, and not everyone is going to necessarily be offered a social worker as they're going through treatment. They may not know that that resource exists. They may not know necessarily how to communicate with their care team about self-care needs and about how that can fit into treatment. Sometimes it can be really intimidating to talk to people in that position of authority who are treating you, and
Right.
to be like, and what I say, is that going against the grain? Am I going to not get the same kind of care if I'm trying to stand up for myself? So like, what are
Absolutely.
some resources, both people to work with like social workers, but also potentially some other just internal resources that someone can equip themselves to be successful in that environment and getting a self-care routine ish
Yeah.
started?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, right? The applicability. So the first one is if you're in treatment, whether you're in treatment or you have a loved one in treatment, ask if there's a social worker available. Even if you feel like, I don't need a social worker, what would I talk to a social worker about? Just meet them, because you never know if you will need them, and you also don't know what you don't know. There's kind of that saying, you don't know what you don't know. So maybe they know of something that could be really helpful for you. And so you could just meet them if they're available, right? So many treatment centers don't have that available. Most of them do, but their capacity might look very different from one hospital to the next in terms of what are their job responsibilities. So there's that piece. But you could just, if they are available, just ask, what is your job? I was listening to a podcast. They recommended that I ask about social work services. What is it that you offer? Just so you know what resources are there. And usually if there's resources in the community, or at least within the treatment center, it's usually going to be the social worker who knows about it, if it's not like a bedside nurse. So that's the first one. Organizations like yourself, fight colorectal cancer, look online, look for support groups in your area. Cancer support community, I worked with that organization for quite a while, and now I'm on the professional advisory board for the local affiliate here in Arizona, but they're all over the US. They have a helpline where you can talk to licensed clinicians, licensed mental health clinicians, so social workers, marriage and family therapists. And again, it doesn't have to be, well, I don't need counseling. It doesn't have to be that. It could just be, I'm just calling to find out what resources are available. What are some things that I might want to know about, maybe now or in the future? And that's both for people who are going through the treatment, but also loved ones and caregivers. It's helpful for both. There's also some really great online resources for people who do like things that are more kind of like in that meditation area of self-care. And again, self-care is not meditation. That's one form of self-care. But there's things like Headspace. I think it's just headspace.com, or maybe it's an app now. Calm.com. You can look up free meditations on YouTube. There's some very quick ones, 2-minute ones. So there's so many different types of resources. And I think a lot of it is with that mentality of you don't know what you don't know. So just start asking questions. What are some resources that could be helpful for us, that might be helpful for us? If it's a treatment center you're with, asking a social worker. It could even be, I almost hesitate to say this, calling your insurance company. Sometimes you can get a navigator who's really helpful with the insurance company, who can help give you some resources, but also recognize that some insurance companies don't offer that, or you just may not get somebody who knows the resources. But then also just the internet. The internet is your best friend in this sense, in terms of what are helpful resources, what are support groups. Do be cautious, make sure it's coming from authoritative places, American Cancer Society, CRC, and Cancer Support Community. There's so many different agencies out there that really have some great information in terms of self-care, what's available in your area. But again, asking if you're currently in active treatment, or you have a loved one in active treatment, asking about a social worker or even a patient navigator. That can be a great resource if you have young children, or if you have nieces, nephews, or grandchildren who you're really close with, and you know that they're struggling with the treatment of a loved one. See if there's a child life specialist. That's an amazing resource if there are little ones, children, or even teens who are being impacted by this too. So a lot of people don't even have any idea about a child life specialist, but if there are children involved in the care of the family member, that's a great resource also. So that's just some. There's so many out there. I'm sure, you all have a great website with resources, some really great educational resources too. Yeah, there's a lot out there. It's just a matter of kind of poking around and finding it.
It's good to keep informed, and everything is a scavenger hunt on the internet these days. But yeah,
Right.
as you said, certainly come visit our website and check out our resources in our resource library, as well as our helpline that's connected to cancer support community. We're all here to support you. And then of course, we want to discuss as well briefly, just because self-care is great as a concept, we want to all adapt it and everything like that. But there's also a point in which self-care is probably not enough for some people. Some
Yes.
people who are really finding either grief or other real serious emotions that their self-care just isn't doing enough for. And we want to make sure that we're addressing that. It's important to realize maybe where that line is for you of
Mhm.
like, self-care is not doing enough for me. I'm not getting what I need for grace and wellness in my life. So
Right.
how can someone maybe look for those signs, and then most importantly, be able to access greater resources for their emotional health?
Absolutely. So first I will say, so the research says that roughly 1/3 of people who are going through cancer treatment or have gone through cancer treatment struggle with a level of clinical depression or anxiety. And those of us who have worked in oncology highly, highly believe that that is a very conservative estimate. I would say probably at least 50%. It doesn't mean that it's constant, but at some point, it is a very real issue. And so look for signs, if you're just constantly feeling on edge or irritable. I think sometimes people think of, kind of like the stereotypical signs of depression, gloomy, in bed all day. That's definitely, it can be part of it. But there's also this other side where it's irritability, not feeling yourself, feeling kind of off kilter, not in equilibrium, and having these thoughts of like, I don't even recognize who I am anymore. So if you're having a lot of those kind of thoughts or feelings, not interested in the things that you're used to being interested in, not being able to kind of calm down and calm your own body and mind, those are some red flags, and definitely something worth talking with your healthcare provider about, a trusted healthcare provider. And there's this difficult dynamic. Sometimes there's physicians where that's just not, it's nothing against them, it's just not their area of focus. And so if you've asked for a referral to speak with a social worker or a counseling referral to speak with a therapist, and you feel like you're not making a lot of headway, that's where you can ask for, call the hospital and go to an operator or a nurse and ask what resources are available. It could also be calling your insurance company and saying, what are my benefits? Who's within network, and finding some therapists. And one thing that I'll say is, some people will say, well, I don't even have time to go to counseling. Or this drives me crazy. I'm not crazy. It's like, no, it's not about that. And people who go to counseling, it go for so many different reasons. And sometimes we just need a little unbiased ear to bend, if you will, somebody to kind of process through things with, to help us process everything that's going on. I'm not in direct practice anymore, but I would anticipate, with the level of the pandemic and social distancing that's required of just the kind of general population, but then we think about people who are exposed to chemo and have, compromised immune systems after surgeries. People who are going through treatment right now are so, I'm like feeling myself get teary-eyed, so isolated right now. Just so isolated. It breaks my heart to think of people sitting in a chemo chair without a loved one next to them, if that's something that they want. Somebody being in the hospital without loved ones being able to visit them. It's really hard. These times are even harder than they were before, and they were hard before. So if you're finding yourself struggling, I really encourage you to reach out, ask for a social worker who could maybe get you a referral. If that's not making any, if that's not helping, calling your insurance and asking about, what are my behavioral health services? Most insurance plans cover that. You might have a copay, but there's usually people who are in network. Like you said, your helpline that's connected with cancer support community is a great place to go for free counseling, free support. But yeah, there's support out there, but if you're just feeling off balance, if you're not feeling yourself, there is support available. If you're finding yourself not wanting to get out of bed, if you're finding yourself not enjoying the things that you used to really enjoy, reach out. Don't try and do it alone. It's not worth it when there is so much support out there to help people kind of get pulled out of that. And sometimes we all need a little extra support. So there's nothing wrong with seeking that. There's still such a stigma about seeking that support, and it makes me so sad, because as human beings, you know, we need support sometimes, and sometimes we're not able to have enough of our own internal energy to muster up the strength to pull out of it. And so that's why there's all of these licensed professionals out there to offer that support.
Well, it's really good to know, especially, you know, what free resources are out there and
Yeah.
other options and things like that. Because I know it's been difficult for people that I've worked with in the past as a community health worker, of just like, with all those treatment schedules and everything, to finally find a social worker that they want to meet with, but
Mhm.
they can only meet with them on Saturdays or like
Right.
after 5 p.m. And then it's like
Mhm.
your options just dwindle if you're not within that window. But it's
Yes.
like, that window is not conducive for people who live their everyday lives, you know, and
Right.
everything like that, which can be really challenging. So especially now, I think with all the amount of investment that's been put into telehealth and different
Mhm.
resources like that that you can use. But my question with that is, if we can pause on that for a moment, is
Sure.
I know even for me, someone who's like on Zoom pretty much all day, every day, it feels like, you know, during
Yeah.
these times, I still crave that personal connection. And I can imagine for something as personal as talking about your emotions and opening up to someone over such a digital binary ones and zeros
Mhm.
format, you lose some of that personalization. But I also know people who have been really successful at making that happen and just being able to encourage a really successful therapeutic environment
Mhm.
across that digital span.
Yeah.
So do you have any recommendations or tips and tricks for people to be able to engage in telehealth in a way that would be as effective as they could possibly make it?
Yeah, so yeah, it's so true. So many people are like living on Zoom these days with our work and jobs and all of that. I think one thing is to know for yourself if you are somebody who feels energized after a Zoom meeting or like a FaceTime call, or if you feel a little bit more tired than you normally would when you're meeting with somebody. I think that that's really important to just kind of do that self-reflection, and then letting your provider know that. Most providers will need you to be on for telehealth and counseling in that sense, or doctors, even if you end up wanting a psychiatry referral to explore medication options, maybe they'll probably want you on video camera. But if it's for ongoing counseling, um, the first thing I'll say is don't base your, sole experience off of the first meeting. Give it at least 3 tries. So much of finding a good therapist is not necessarily finding a quote unquote good therapist as much it is finding somebody who you just click with. Finding somebody where you like their personality style, their communication style. So I'll kind of add that in there. But I think if you can think for yourself, do I like Zoom? Do I not like Zoom or FaceTime? Anything like that. And then communicating that with your provider. You know, for in higher education, we're seeing a lot of students getting Zoom fatigue because everything is over Zoom now. And there's a level that's really kind of exhausting about it when you're constantly on camera. And so for that piece, I would just communicate that with whoever it is that you're talking with over that platform, and seeing if maybe you can have Zoom breaks, maybe 5 minutes camera off, 5 minutes camera on. Or once you develop a good rapport and relationship with the counselor, maybe you have a session that's over the phone and you don't do the video thing. Um, and so I also think that it's okay, you don't have to put on makeup and do your hair special, or wear a special outfit or anything like that. Just show up and be you. Don't feel like you have to go through this whole routine just to get ready for this meeting. If you want to and it makes you feel good, great, do it. But don't don't add that onto your schedule if it's something that is like, oh, this is just one more thing I have to do, because that is going to make engaging in that much harder on a regular basis. It's going to be something that becomes easier and easier to put off because it's like, I just don't have the time. I have the meeting. I have to get ready for the meeting. Don't put that extra strain on yourself. And then in terms of the engaging, just be yourself. Be you. Don't feel like you have to put on a show. You're not acting, you know. So I think that that's okay to just show up, even if it means that you are just rolling out of bed. If you're just really struggling and that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do. Don't add extra strain on yourself. And again, having that communication with the provider. Like I said, most, if not all, will want you to be on camera for, if it's like something that's going to be a billable health insurance provided thing. That said, the helpline that CRC offers with Cancer Support Community, that's on the phone. And so I think that some people really, I know that some people, because I worked on the helpline for a while, really appreciate the anonymity that comes with that and the ability to just call and not be on camera. And so maybe it's finding alternative options too. If being on Zoom or camera just isn't working for you, you know, try the helpline. They have long extended hours. It's been extended even more because of the pandemic. And so it's like you said, you don't have to necessarily fit it into, well, I have work, and so I can't meet that schedule. They have like 12 hours a day, I think they're available. And then now I believe there's weekend hours offered too. So I think, again, it's figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and don't try to force something if it's not working.
Well, I'm certainly going to have to look again at my own routine practice. I always thought that routines were so helpful, yet I never actually really follow them or adhere to them. So I think that's a really good insight for myself to even realize from this. You know, I'm sure other people would think the same thing in their own lives. And I'm certainly going to look at, you know, in my own life, that self-comfort versus self-care. I think that's something that, you know, I need to take another look at, because I might be fooling myself with some self-comfort and thinking that it's self-care. So that's another thing that I'll think of as I'm crafting my own New Year's resolutions.
And self-comfort isn't, I will say some self-comfort isn't bad. It's just make sure you're doing both, right? Self-care too. Sometimes it's okay to just veg in front of the TV. So it's not always bad. Just
so I don't need to throw out all the Christmas cookies in my house right now.
Right. Yeah. Ship them my way.
There you go. Well, before we wrap up, I just want to give you a chance just to be yourself and reach out to our community here. What are some words of encouragement for everyone out there listening to this who's maybe now a little bit more motivated to really get their self-care in gear? What's that cherry on top that's really going to help them to make that final step?
No pressure. So I don't know if I'd call it a cherry on top, but what I will say is just know that you're not alone. Like I said, you know, right now, people going through treatment and caring for somebody going through treatment was hard before. I remember when my family was going through it with my sister when she was a young adult. She's still a young adult, but when she was a very young adult, it was just so hard. I cannot even imagine doing it now with the pandemic and all of the different changes that it has required. It's very, very lonely for many people. And so what I would just say is don't be afraid to reach out for help. There are free resources. Check out the Fight CRC helpline. It's connected with Cancer Support Community, but if you just find it on the CRC website, it's there. Just call, reach out for support. And again, don't try to overthink it and add it as something that is another burden. Make sure it's something that really is feeding you emotionally, physically, spiritually, whatever it is. It looks different for everybody. It doesn't have to be this long, drawn out routine. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Just don't be afraid to reach out for help. You're not alone. I think that is what I would just want to end with, is letting people know that you might be feeling very, very alone, but the reality is you're not. And there are resources out there. There's free resources out there that are good. They're really, really good resources. It's not this you get what you pay for mentality with this area. There are some really great free resources out there. Fight Colorectal Cancer offers them. So definitely reach out and get that support. Just pick up the phone, send that email, get the support that you need, and don't feel like you have to kind of trudge through this on your own.
Wow, amazing. Sheila, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing everything that you have in your insights from your experience, both personally and at work. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed having you here. And it won't be the last one we have, everyone out there. This is so good. We're definitely having another discussion with Sheila in the future, so stay tuned. And make
Thank
sure
you.
to follow, get more of those resources, see that helpline and everything else. Come visit our website. Like, comment, subscribe to this video so you can continue to get more content and hear more discussions that we have with other professionals in a variety of other subjects. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Thanks, Sheila.